people that show some deep, decent goodness. You are one of those people, and what I love watching you is that it could be the farthest ideological person away from you, and you just have this, like you look at people like you see their divinity. Whether it's the person at the highest position, a leader of the Senate on either side, or someone who holds the door. What I love about you is when I watch you, you're one of the senators. Some people just keep to their side of the aisle. I always look up and I find you over there talking to somebody. And I just rely on that decency in you as a friend. And I've come to love you like a brother. And I want to thank you for being here before your alarm in the morning goes off. It really touches me. And I don't know if you remember this, but about 12 hours ago, you sat right here and you embraced me in a hug. And I leaned on that hug because I wasn't sure that I would even make it 12 hours. I take strength from you, my friend. And I take strength from you to hold to my kindness, to look for it everywhere. This is a story I don't think I've ever shared with you, but it speaks to how we get things done and how we should get things done. But when I first got to the United States Senate, my mentor, Bill Bradley, gave me 3 real lessons for me to learn. I think I've obeyed 2 out of the 3. One was to know the rules of procedure really well. That's the one I've probably failed. I'm still learning things 13 years into this about the rules of procedure. The second one was become a specialist in some areas. Don't be a mile wide and an inch deep, and I feel like I've done a pretty good job on that. But the one that he called me that was most fruitful, I've already mentioned one of the benefits I had in doing this with John McCain earlier in this 12 hours. But he commanded me to go and meet with all your Republican colleagues, take them out to dinner, sit with them for lunch, whoever they are. I went out to dinner with Ted Cruz. It was hard to find a restaurant because I'm a vegan and Ted Cruz is from Texas. But I still remember that we went out and how people were sort of shocked just to see 2 human beings breaking bread. But the story I want to tell my friend about is when I went to see Jim Inhofe, Republican from the same state as Langford. And I couldn't get him to meet with me. Couldn't get on his schedule. And I found out that he had Bible study in his hideaway. And so I go up to his hideaway for Bible study. Thune was there. And we all have implicit biases. We all have implicit biases. My implicit bias was that I did not expect this older, conservative man that I would walk in and see on his mantle this beautiful picture centered of him hugging a little black girl. I'm embarrassed by that it so surprised me. And I, especially in those days, I didn't talk to the senior giants in the Senate. I didn't call them by their first names. I still have a problem calling Senator Durbin by his first name, for example. He is a lion of the Senate, in my opinion, and one of the kindest people to me since I've been here. But so I go to him, I go to Jim Inhofe, I go, "Mr. Chairman, sir?" And I look at the picture and I go, "Who dat?" And he smiles and chuckles. And then he tells me the most beautiful story of his family adopting this little black girl out of some of the most terrible circumstances. And I was so moved. And thinking about my friend Bill Bradley, I would have never known this incredibly beautiful thing about somebody who ideologically we disagreed on so many things, but knowing this personal moment, it created this thread between us. Not a rope, not a cord, but a thread that connected me to him and had created a deeper affection. So fast forward many months in this body, and there's a big education bill, which Chris Murphy referenced earlier. A big education bill was going through the Senate because No Child Left Behind, we were going back the other way. And Senator Durbin has told me about this. Pendulum sometimes swings and swings back in this place. And it was a deal. Lamar Alexander was in the well of the Senate. He was the manager of the bill, and there was no amendments allowed. No amendments allowed. And of course, I'm sitting back here. This is where I sat. And you talk about egos, my ego think I had this great amendment and I was frustrated that they were having this rule, no amendments, but I got a great amendment to do something about homeless and foster children that have the worst educational outcomes. And I thought I had a modest amendment to try to make a difference for American children that are in foster care or that were homeless. And I'm frustrated. I'm sitting back here, something that I dream of doing again one day, sitting, and just kind of upset. And then I see walking through those doors Senator Jim Inhofe, and he walks to the well, kind of talking, and I remember the story he told me about this little black girl and his family, and something tells me to get up, and I walk into the well, down these steps, and I say to him, Mr. Chairman, sir, I know how much you care for children in tough circumstances. I have an amendment, and I explained my amendment to him, and he looked at me and he gave me the Senate version of no, which is, I'll think about it. And I got frustrated and I said, thank you, sir, for considering it. And I walked back and I sat down right here. And then when I picked my head up, he's marching into our side like you do on the other side, like his GPS coordinates were off, marches up to me and just sort of grunts at me, I'm in. And then turns around and starts walking away from me. And I step up, I go, wait, excuse me, what do you mean? He goes, Cory, I'm going to co-sponsor your amendment. And I was so happy. And now I go over to Senator Grassley. You say the same thing to him, a relationship that, thanks to Dick Durbin, I really bonded. I have this sweet relationship with him, even though, again, we disagree on so much. And he doesn't even make me wait. He looks at me and he goes, you got Inhofe? And he signs on my... By the time I go to Lamar Alexander, I look at him and I'm like, I got a full house. I'm sorry, I got no other Democrats, but I got all these Republicans. And he looks at me, he laughs, and he goes, really? And he puts the amendment on the bill. It's the law of the land now. And so what you said in the beginning of your long wind-up question, my dear friend, my dear brother, is how real change is made. That man, Dick Durbin, when I first got to the Senate, he knew how much I cared about criminal justice reform. He brought me to the table. I started working. As I presided, I started working in conversations with Mike Lee and conversations with Chuck Grassley. We cobbled together a bill. It wasn't done by executive fiat. It was done in the Senate. 87 votes. It's the law of the land. Thousands have been liberated from unjust incarceration. And so my point to the senator is his spirit is so right, is so true about what it takes to make real change. But the president we have right now doesn't seem to be coming to this body with any kind of bold bipartisan legislation to solve the problems of our nation, to cobble together the common ground of this country on immigration. No, he is not acting like that. He is using language like presidential primacy. He's defending his corrupt practices in immigration by saying things like presidential primacy. He's invoking the Alien Enemies Act. He's evoking the Alien Enemies Act, an act from the 1700s to deny due process, which Anton Scalia, a textualist, says that whether you're born in this country or not, you have due process here. The Constitution states only one thing twice. Both the 5th and the 14th Amendments say that no one, not no citizen, no one shall be deprived of liberty or property without due process of law. And yet this president is disappearing people. And as we documented here, disappearing the wrong people. As we documented here, detaining unjustly Americans, separating families, all while pushing his agenda and doing things that the values of people on both sides of this aisle don't believe in, like stopping the investigation of children for alleged sexual molestation. This is wrong. And I sat down with some of the advocates who were telling me and who were trying to fight to stop the law from being broken, and they scared me, Dick Durbin. because they said what I said on this floor. If someone is willing to violate the Constitution for some, it endangers the constitutional rights for us all. Do not think this is, those people. If they are violating rights of some, it is a threat to the rights of all. I am standing here because of a national crisis that is growing. We talked about Social Security. We talked about health care. We talked about education. This is a crisis for us. And this is what the person said. They talked about the Insurrection Act. They've been hearing people in the administration talk about the Insurrection Act. Every person in this Congress and across the country wants a safe and secure border, but scapegoating immigrants to erode basic constitutional freedoms does not make America safer, does not make our community safer, does not reform our immigration system like we should be doing in a bipartisan manner like Langford and Murphy. It does not stand our long-standing problems from our agricultural industry to our tech industry. History has shown that when due process and basic constitutional rights are eroded for some people, it does not stop. It continues to erode. The shoreline that kept you safe will shrink until it reaches you. I am reminded of German pastor Martin Niemöller's quote about fascism in Germany. They came for the socialists, and I did not speak up because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me. And no one was left to speak. Well, everything that has happened in the last few months contradicts American values, shared values. I am most concerned about what this signals for the future and the potential invocation of this president of the Insurrection Act. Some of our country's most prominent lawyers have warned that the invocation of these two antiquated laws, the Alien Enemies Act and the Insurrection Act, may result in the true erosion of our constitutional rights. Trump's recent invocation of the Alien Enemies Act is the first step. Disappearing people without due process, as Justice Scalia says is wrong. And then on the first day in office, Trump directed the Secretaries of Defense and Homeland Secretary, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretaries of Homeland Security, Trump directed them to initiate a 90-day review to determine whether the president should invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807. That 90-day review, when do those 90 days come up, folks? This month, in 19 days, April 20th, the President of the United States, who's already invoked a 1780-something law, also asked his immigration folks, his Homeland Security folks, to do a 90-day review about the Insurrection Act of 1807. Now, there's people probably watching and say, what is the Insurrection Act? I bet a lot of folks, I had to look up what the Alien Enemies Act was. So let me tell folks what the Insurrection Act that our president, on his first day in office, of all the things a president has to do, he turned to the Secretaries of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security to initiate a 90-day review of the Insurrection Act. America, what is the Insurrection Act of 1807? It's among the president's most powerful authorities that he can deploy the U.S. armed forces and militia during a national emergency. He can declare a national emergency. This president has already wrongfully declared national emergencies. He declared a national emergency on energy. Senator Kaine talked about the outrageousness of somebody declaring a national emergency on energy when we were at the highest level of petrochemical extraction in our country's history. And until he started rolling back what we were doing on wind and solar, we had an all-of-the-above strategy. Nobody drilled more than Joe Biden. The Insurrection Act gives the ability of the president to declare a national emergency to suppress insurrections, to quell civil unrest or domestic violence, and enforce the law when he believes it's being instructed. When can the president invoke the Insurrection Act? Well, nothing in the text of the law defines insurrection, rebellion, or domestic violence. Those are the prerequisites for deployment, but they don't define those things. One of Trump's first executive orders, signed the evening he took office on January 20th, was titled, "Declaring a National Emergency at the Southern Border of the United States." In that order, he said American sovereignty is under attack. He has already declared a national emergency. Neither Congress nor the courts played a role in deciding what constitutes an obstruction or a rebellion. If Trump does unlawfully invoke the Insurrection Act, he can conceivably use our military to carry out his deportation agenda within our country's borders. All while any due process or opportunity to prove that their presence in the U.S. is lawful, or even that they are a citizen. Trump himself said he wants to deport American citizens to foreign countries. Trump himself has said, I want to deport American citizens to foreign countries. On February 4th, he said, and I quote, "I'm just saying, if we had a legal right to do it, I would do it in a heartbeat. I don't know if we do or not. We're looking at it right now." This is what he has asked his Secretary of Defense and his Secretary of Homeland Security to say, can I invoke the Insurrection Act? So don't be mistaken. This is not just about immigrants. This is not just denying immigrants the due process that Anton Scalia said that immigrants have a right to, so you don't disappear the wrong people like the Trump administration has done. That you don't wildly disagree with what a citizen is saying and use that as a pretext to disappear them. He is creating the pretext to invoke that 1807 law, the Insurrection Act. And if he does that when they came for the immigrants and denied them due process, he is trying to get us to surrender our commitment to the constitutional guarantees that Americans have. He has said he would deport Americans if he could. When the president denies due process to some in America, it threatens the due process of all. Let's see what happens on April 20th if this president, who's already invoked the Alien Enemies Act, follows through and invokes the Insurrection Act. But why wait till April 20th? Raise your voice now, stand up now, do something now, cause some good trouble now. Let this president know that if he does ever do that, there will be a rising up of people's voices, a rising up of good trouble, as John Lewis would say, to say, not in my country, this is unacceptable.
Will the senator yield for a question?
To Senator Dick Durbin, somebody who's been my mentor and friend, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you. I first want to acknowledge this extraordinary moment in the history of the Senate. I believe you've been holding the floor now for more than 10 hours, and perhaps we'll go on it even longer. And you've been joined by your colleague and friend, Senator Murphy of Connecticut. And I'm sorry to take the early morning shift, but I didn't want to miss this moment in history, not just for the historic nature of it, but for the substance of it as well. I just remind my colleague and fellow member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, it was only 3, maybe 4 weeks ago that we had witnesses before the Judiciary Committee, and I asked a question, and one of them is pending on the calendar, the executive calendar on the floor. His name is Dean Sauer of Missouri, and he's seeking the position of Solicitor General of the United States. Along with him was the lady aspiring to be the Assistant Deputy Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, and Aaron Wrights, who has been approved by the Senate for a legal policy position. And the questioning went to the basics of our Constitution, which you have noted here today, and that is, what is the check and balance on a president? What is the accountability of a president under the Constitution? As I read it, and I don't profess to be expert, I'm still learning, as I read it, the accountability of the president is in Article 2, and Article 3, Article 3, the judiciary. Ultimately, the president can be held accountable by impeachment in Congress or by decision of court that some of the orders that he is promulgating are inconsistent with law and the Constitution. And the question that was asked of the witnesses who are seeking positions in the Department of Justice, can a public official defy a court order? It seems so fundamental and basic. The answer is no, of course, but these three witnesses all equivocated in their own ways, which raises a question: if this president is not held accountable by a court order, what then can control a president who misuses their office to the detriment of the nation or the people who live here? And that, I thought, was a fundamental question. It was interesting to note, you may remember, that one of our Republican colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, after hearing these witnesses equivocate on whether a public official can defy a court order, came to the committee and basically said, "What are you saying?" The answer is obvious. You can criticize a decision of the court within the bounds of propriety as a member of the bar. You can appeal a decision of the court, but if that doesn't satisfy you, your recourse is to quit, resign, leave. The Constitution has the last word. The courts have the last word. And I think that's a question that you're raising today. Where is the accountability of the President of the United States when he misuses a power of office? In the cases that you've mentioned, the Alien Enemies Act, it's a law that's been around since, I think, 1807 or somewhere that time. I think it's clear, unless you have declared a war or unless you are invaded, you cannot invoke the Alien Enemies Act as this president has done. And he's being challenged in that regard. Yesterday, our friend, Senator Grassley, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, and I say friend, some people back home say, don't say that anymore. We don't talk to those people. They're wrong. This is a body where we do talk to one another, and we should, for good reason. Well, he raised a question yesterday: why is President Trump being challenged so often in court? Well, he has issued 102 executive orders. I don't know if that's a record, but I'll bet it is. 102 executive orders questioning something as basic as birthright sovereignty, birthright citizenship. And so the point that I'm getting to is, in obvious situations here where President Trump has gone too far, where is the accountability? It's not going to be an impeachment. We're realists. We know that the Republican House of Representatives is not likely to ever consider that. It could be in the courts. And if it goes to the courts, the question is, will this president follow a court order if it goes against his policy? And if he won't follow that court order, where is the accountability? Where is the check and balance? Where is the constitutional framework, which is supposed to be at the foundation of this democracy? I think you're raising important questions. In the Insurrection Act, the use of our military for political purposes is a frightening prospect. It's something we have avoided throughout our history and should continue to. And I just commend you for raising this point because I believe it's timely. It's as timely as the questions that we asked of these Department of Justice nominees about the enforceability of court orders. And the question is now, will the American people speak up? I'm counting on some of our Republican friends to speak up too. Throughout history, there have been moments when the party other than the president's party showed extreme courage, political courage, and spoke up. We need that kind of voice now. I thank you for raising that on the floor this morning. My question to you is, at this moment in time, as we ask these nominees whether they would follow a court order or defy a court order, doesn't that get to the basics of our constitutional democracy?
Yes, 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 it does. I mean, you put forth this litany that where we have to ask ourselves is, at what point do my colleagues in the House or the Senate and the Republican Party say, enough, enough? God bless John Kennedy for calling out the absolute absurd. I was in that hearing where you have nominees for some of the highest positions in the administration failing to say that they will abide by a court order. I mean, that is something we haven't heard people on either side of nominees just say so bluntly now, not yes, I will follow the orders of a court. They're equivocating. And God bless one of my colleagues, John Kennedy, who said that's absurd. You either obey the order or you resign, because we have a constitution. And so when is it enough? When is it enough? This is the month of Passover, and there's a wonderful song I love singing when I'm at a Pesach, the Dayenu. It would have been enough, is the song, if God just delivered us from Egypt. It would have been enough if he parted the seas. It would have been enough. Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. This is a kind of a twisted version of that. When is it enough? When the President of the United States starts a meme coin on his first day, violating the emoluments clause immediately and enriching himself. When is it enough? When he takes an agency that is on the front lines of stopping infectious diseases like Ebola or tuberculosis-resistant, drug-resistant tuberculosis from coming here. Is that enough? When we created that in Congress and he has no right to stop that agency, would that have been enough? When is it enough for him to issue executive orders that trample on the highest ideals of this land? When he mocks members of the court so badly that even the current Chief Justice admonishes him? When is it enough? When Elon Musk is indiscriminately firing people and then realizing, oops, we need the FAA safety folks. Oops, we need the nuclear folks who are helping us keep our regulation. When is it enough that you will say, okay, I'll call them in and have a hearing to create some transparency in what he's doing? When is it enough when he activates the Alien Enemies Acts and starts disappearing human beings without due process? When is it enough? Well, it's enough for me. It's enough for me. 12 hours now I'm standing and I'm still going strong because this president is wrong. And he's violating principles that we hold dear and principles in this document that are so clear and plain. The powers of the Article 1 branch are spelled out and he is violating them. Don't take my word for it. Republican appointed judges, Democrat appointed judges are saying it and stopping him, and then he maligns the judge that did that. When is it enough for people to speak out and not just fall in line, to put patriotism over a person that's in the White House? So to your question, sir, to my friend, and I'm sorry to get a little animated at this early morning hour, but I am so frustrated. And not just because of that, but I'm reading the stories. We're going into the next section, which is national security, and I'm reading the stories of our citizens of this country. Not just New Jerseyans. Yeah, there's a lot we've read in these 12 hours, but there are people from all over the country are reaching out to my office, and I know they are yours. You're the second highest ranking Democrat in here. I know they're reaching out to you because you're a man that stands for justice. I know they reach out to your office too because you're one of these outposts for sanity in a Congress that is being too complicit to an executive that is overstepping his authority and violating the Constitution and hurting people who rely on health care and Social Security. I'm reading these stories, sir, because the voices of the Americans that don't have the privilege that the 100 of us don't get to stand here, but I believe the power of the people is greater than the people in power. That's the ideals of our democracy and our Constitution. So I'm rip-roaring and ready. I'm wide awake. I'm going to stand here for as many hours as I can, 12 hours, and I recognize that my other friend, another person I consider more than a friend, like a sister to me, from the state of New York, my neighbor.
Senator Booker, would you yield for a question?
My sister, for you, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Senator Booker, I've been listening to this debate all night, and I gotta say, you're on fire. And you're on fire because the American people are very, very angry about what is happening. They are not happy with what this administration has done. It's contrary to what was promised. It's contrary to what was expected. And I know we're going to talk about national security in a few minutes, but can I ask a question about one of the topics you talked about last night? Because it was exactly what my constituents were talking to me about yesterday. So I was in New York yesterday, and we talked about these cuts to Social Security. I have to say, I was stopped by the gentleman who worked at Amtrak and said, Madam Senator, I just want to thank you for protecting my Social Security. That has never happened to me before. Never happened at Amtrak to be stopped by someone who worked there to thank me for one thing I had done that day. But I'm telling you, Senator Booker, when Elon Musk starts firing people at Social Security and tells the Social Security Administration, you cannot answer the phone, what are our mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers supposed to do? Many of them are not readily available to be on a computer. Many of them can't ask their question online. And worse, Elon Musk is expecting them to show up in person at a Social Security office. How many of our older Americans are not able to drive anymore or are uncomfortable driving? How many of our older Americans feel uncomfortable getting in the subway to get to a Social Security Administration because there's stairs or because the lighting's not good enough? These are the challenges that our older Americans have. And so I just want to talk about the things you told us last night about the risk to Social Security. Social Security is our seniors' money. It's not the government's money. It's their money. So what happens when you make it hard for a senior to call and make sure their check's on the way, or their check never showed up and they can't find it? For a lot of older Americans, that Social Security check is the only money they have for that month. It pays for food, right? It pays for heating bills. It pays for their medicine. It pays for their rent. It pays for everything they need to survive. And Elon Musk's office doesn't believe anybody should be answering the phones. Who is he to tell America how to run its Social Security Administration when our seniors need those checks? They've crippled the phone service, even though, get this one, can't answer the phone, crippled the phone service, you can only make an appointment on the phone. So how are you supposed to make an appointment if you are going to go in? I mean, that's absurd. They plan to cut 7,000 staff. That's a lot of staff. 7,000 staff, even though the Social Security Administration staffing is already at a 50-year low. So they are lying when they are saying this is about efficiency. They just want the money. And what do they want the money for? Tax cuts for billionaire buddies of Elon Musk. It is an obscenity. It is an absurdity. It is an outrage. And everyone in America should be concerned. Hands off our Social Security, Elon Musk and President Trump. Hands off. They are rallying all across the country to say, hands off my Social Security, hands off my Medicare, hands off my Medicaid. It's an outrage, and I don't think people should stand for it, because your Social Security check is your hard-earned money. It is not for Elon Musk to play with, to shift around, or send it to tax breaks for his billionaire friends. Now, I have to say, my office has been working closely with one senior. Now, she's a New Yorker with a disability, and she was told that she had to call a specific representative's extension by the end of March. Well, that was yesterday. And if she didn't get this person, her application could be denied. She's called every day, sometimes more than once a day. She has been on hold for 4 to 5 hours just to reach this representative. As of yesterday, when we reached out to her, she had still not reached the representative. So Americans across the country are panicked. They are stressed. They are worried that they won't get their hard-earned money back, their retirement, to pay for the things that they need. Now, this is the money they've spent their entire careers paying into. You know, every time you get a paycheck, Senator Booker, there's a line that says Social Security because that money's been taken out of your paycheck and put into Social Security, so it's there for you when you retire. It's your retirement. The page is sitting here, right here. You are paying into your Social Security. Now imagine this is your first paycheck, isn't it? I bet it is your first paycheck. Your first paycheck, you're putting in dollars that, you know, you want saved so that when you can't even imagine what it's going to be like to be 65. But the day you're working here, the fact that you spent all night here supporting Senator Booker, that's your retirement. Wouldn't you be pissed off if Elon Musk took your retirement money? You should be. He doesn't have any right to it. And what he's doing is he's doing it by cutting staff. So if you need help because your Social Security didn't arrive, then how are you supposed to get that check? They can't issue you a new one unless they know that it didn't show up in the mail like it's supposed to. Ultimately, cutting individuals from Social Security doesn't just affect them, it affects the entire economy. So you can imagine if all our seniors are getting this Social Security benefit, you can't go then buy your groceries. You're not going to be able to then go buy whatever you need for your home. Those stores will get less money, and that means there'll be less resources in the economy. Social Security, if you didn't know it, it's our country's largest anti-poverty program. It keeps people out of poverty. That's what it does. When we designed Social Security, however many decades ago, it was so that our seniors don't die in poverty, because they were dying. About half of seniors at that time were dying in poverty. They didn't have enough food to live. And so we created Social Security. It's one of the most popular programs. It's one of the most effective programs. So reducing access to this key program, Senator Booker, is an outrage. It's harmful, it's cruel, it's hurtful. So I know that this is something that you've really spent a lot of time on last night, but don't you think it's cruel to not allow phone service? Don't you think it's wrong to make it harder for people to get access to their hard-earned money? Don't you think this is something that America did not sign up for in this election?
I read last night, thank you for the question, my friend. I read last night some of the most painful letters of people over and over again from throughout my state and through other states who are living in fear, who use words like terrified and told stories that they couldn't sleep because of the rhetoric of this president, the rhetoric of Elon Musk calling it a Ponzi scheme, telling lies during a joint address. And then I read stories from people that work in Social Security. They're telling about not having desks and the waiting lines and the inefficiencies that this has created and the horrible, deteriorating customer service. Yeah. And I've been trying as much as I can during this last 12 hours to read the stories of Republicans.
Yeah, this affects everyone.
Yes. To read editorials from the Wall Street Journal to just show that this isn't a partisan thing. This isn't about left or right. It's about right or wrong. It's about, will we as a country honor our commitments that we made? And then I read independent folks that are saying this is crazy, that this program is even in jeopardy.
I have another Question for you, because I know you want to move on to some national security issues this morning.
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you, Senator Booker. So the other thing that stressed out my constituents that I talked about this weekend is air safety. They're very, very stressed out about these cuts to the FAA. You know, there was a plane crash not too far from here, helicopter crash. Everyone on the helicopter perished. We've been reading about stories across the country about flight safety and the fact that there are near collisions all the time. We had a horrible crash in New York, in Buffalo, the Colgan Air crash. I've gotten to know the families over the last several years because they've worked together for legislation to make sure we have pilot safety. But what I've been watching in terms of this administration is they don't seem to care. They just have made up this idea that cuts across the board are necessary to get rid of fraud and waste in the budget. And I agree, we can make government more efficient, but the way you do that is at least learn what each of these agencies do. Study what's happening in them and how to make them more efficient. Make sure the right number of personnel are hired. Make sure the right training is offered. Make sure there's no wasteful programs. That's good government. That is not what Elon Musk and his DOGE boys are doing. That is nothing like what they are doing. They're just cutting everything because they want to make space for these tax cuts for their billionaire buddies. It's really disgraceful. It's something that I don't quite understand. So over the past 2 months, just the past two months, we've seen horrifying accidents and near misses at airports all across the country. And there was another close call just this past Friday, again at DCA. Many of these accidents have been a result of chronic understaffing and antiquated technologies at the FAA. But instead of fixing those problems, the first thing the Trump administration did when it came to power was fire people. I think he's kind of stuck in the loop of The Apprentice. You're fired, you're fired, you're fired. I don't get it. Like, good government is important, and I support efficiency. That's not what they're doing. It's like they're on a power trip, and they just want to fire everybody across the board. Just fire them all. So while a court forced the FAA to rehire workers, thank God for the courts. Thank God for the judges that are doing their jobs and looking at these lawsuits appropriately. Many federal workers have simply moved on and found new jobs because these are highly skilled, highly sought after employees, people that we really want working in the federal government to keep our country safe. Now, just weeks after the horrific plane crash here with 67 people getting killed in Washington, the administration fired hundreds of Federal Aviation Administration employees, jeopardizing the public safety and threatening our national security. So that made no sense. Like, it was right on the heels of some horrific accident that we all witnessed. Now, over 90% of U.S. airport terminal towers don't have enough air traffic controllers. Critical shortages remain for other aviation safety personnel as well, such as safety inspectors and mechanics, because to make sure when we get on that plane, the plane's ready to go. In New York, nearly 40% of positions are unfilled at 2 facilities on Long Island that direct air traffic for Newark, our shared airport, JFK, and LaGuardia. As a result, over these past few years, the U.S. has experienced a substantial and alarming increase in the number of near misses. According to an analysis from the New York Times, in 2023, close calls involving commercial airlines occurred on average multiple times each week. And a number of significant air traffic control lapses increased 65% over the previous year. What did they cite as the major reason behind the increase? A shortage of air traffic controllers. While the Trump administration claims no air traffic controllers or critical safety personnel were fired, we know that many of those who were let go played an essential role in maintaining our air traffic control infrastructure. Others were responsible for maintaining navigational, landing, and radar systems. We also know that safety inspectors, systems specialists, maintenance mechanics are among workers who are affected, and at least one of the employees fired worked for FAA's National Defense Program, which protects our airspace from enemy drones, missiles, aircraft, and used as weapons. I want to talk about those missiles and drones as well. I really want to talk to you about what your thinking is here, that we don't have a plan. You had the incursions in New Jersey, incursions in New York at the same time, and we don't have assurance that those drones aren't being operated by China or Russia or Iran or another adversary for a nefarious purpose. We have to get to the bottom of this, and that's something that, Senator Booker, you and I have been at the forefront on when questioning the administration about what they're doing on this issue. So the question I have is, why did the administration fire these workers and so easily part with them? Who will perform these duties going forward? What risk analysis was performed to ensure this won't make flying less safe? Now, I asked these questions of the Secretary of Transportation in a letter on February 20th, over a month ago, and what was their response? We don't know. They haven't answered my letter. They're not willing to engage the Senate in actually policy and decisions that keep our state safe. What's worse is that we don't know if this is where it ends, or if more reductions are coming and more reductions that allow for safety for our FAA. Now, DOGE's so-called workforce optimization initiative, it's BS. They don't do the analysis first. They just make the cuts. We need the Secretary and the acting FAA administrator to be responsive to Congress's questions and oversight. The American people deserve to have a federal aviation agency that is dedicated to actually doing the job of protecting us, protecting this country. The Trump administration needs to take immediate steps to address FAA staffing shortages across the entire agency, not just air traffic controllers. So, Senator Booker, the question I really want to ask you is, for your state, for New Jerseyans, what are they thinking? Like, how do they receive this information? What do they say when they read about drone incursions over one of your arsenals, over one of your sensitive military bases? What do they think about cutting staff to the FAA when they watch all this information about crashes? I know my constituents are pretty stressed out about it. They don't understand why someone's making these cuts. Again, the why is the most important question. It's not for efficiency. It's not to get rid of the fat. It's not to get rid of the fraud. Never heard an allegation there's fraud in the FAA. Never heard an allegation there's fat in the FAA. They've been understaffed forever. So they're lying about the purpose. So what is the purpose? What is the purpose? What are they going to do with that money, Senator Booker? I'd like to know.
So I appreciate this more than you know, and there's a line threaded throughout your entire question about the way they're going about doing this from so many agencies. First, they're trying to kill certain agencies, Department of Education, which they can't legally do. The USAID, they can't legally do. We created that. It's the Article I branch of government. But on some of these other agencies, like Social Security, where you started, we know it's ready, fire, aim, and actually the aim part never happens. They're savagely cutting personnel, and organization after organization, seniors, thousands of them, are already writing in about the undermining of service. The Wall Street Journal article we read last night said that the customer service at Social Security is going from bad to worse, and painted horrific pictures that are putting seniors in crisis. Not to mention the closing of Social Security centers in rural areas where people have to now drive hours and hours and hours. And so the FAA, it was one of the early outrages that they hired people that they then realized they needed and tried to find some way to pull some of them back. And you and I both know that the way they talk about government workers, a large percentage of them are our veterans, the way they demean and degrade them, the way they accuse them of being parts of corruption, fraud, or fat, when the stories we've been reading of what some of these folks do is extraordinary. And so your question, though, brings up a lot of national security issues. I'm going to bridge to that because you and I both were really, really incensed that we weren't getting enough information when we had these incursions. And I want to start what I've been doing in other sections is just reading, elevating on this floor the voices of people from our country, trying to elevate more of the voices to let people know we see you, we hear you, your outrage, your hurt, your fears, they have value.